All right, there we go. Thank you, everyone. Welcome. I'm Colin Murray, Executive Director for Dane Buy Local. Glad you're able to join us this morning. Denny, would you like to remind everyone about your special offer that you have that you're offering to Dane Buy Local members?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. On March 10th at 6 o'clock, thanks to Becky in Cottage Grove at Kula Yoga, we're going to do a free, no charge CPR class. And if you are available and you're interested, we'd love to have you. I still have 6 seats left. I'm assuming Tom and Jenny are still coming. And I'm going to put Tom to work if he ends up being there. But anyway, we still have 6 seats and we'd love to have you there. And again, it just gets us back into our thing as far as trying to help the community and people understand this is something that is a life-saving thing. And you're giving the opportunity to somebody to live a little longer. So if you're interested, please join us. We'd love to have you. 6 o'clock, March 10th at Kula Yoga, 445 Cottage Grove Road in Cottage Grove.
And how much was that, Denny?
Something about a zero. It's free. Just show up.
Free to any Dane Local members. So thank you, Denny, for doing that.
And I know Paula Evenson's going to show up. I just know she will.
Paula is on this call.
She's sitting in the corner there.
All right, great. Thank you, Denny.
Yep, thank you.
Our webinars on Monday are sponsored by Strategic Brand Marketing, and Peggy Gunderson is here as host of the event. So welcome, Peggy. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I am particularly, I'm excited every Monday morning we get to spend time together, and we've had some really great topics. And today I'm very excited to have in a longtime friend, Brian Lee, join us this morning. A subject that I think is incredibly timely with lots of different things that are going on in the pandemic. And so we've invited him in. Good morning, Brian.
Thanks very much, Peggy, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to turn on my presentation right now.
All right, let me just give a real quick so everyone knows who you are. I think they've seen the post, but you are president at Revelation PR Advertising and Social Media. And we've known each other for a number of years, and one thing I've always liked about you is you have this very calm presence to deliver very good information. And so thanks again. We really appreciate it. He's going to share some information today about how to prepare for a crisis. So Brian.
Thank you. All right. So yes, I would first classify myself as a serial entrepreneur. As you can see, I do a lot of things. And the primary business, Revelation, as Peggy introduced me, we just celebrated 10 years in business last month. So I'm really happy and proud about that. We somehow made it 10 years. So I typically give this presentation in an hour to an hour and a half, but I've condensed it down to 15 minutes for you all. This is what we're going to go through at rapid speed. I normally talk this quickly anyway. So hopefully you can all keep up with this. I want to first give you an outline of what the continuum of public relations looks like. Anything that happens prior to a crisis, right now, for example, is things under the umbrella of reputation management. We're doing things like marketing, advertising, PR, but we're doing other things like community relations, sponsorships, corporate social responsibility. Then, unfortunately, a crisis occurs, and then we shift into crisis communications. So I tell you that because I want you to understand what our purpose is of doing crisis communications. As you can see, the first two relate to reputation management. That trust we built up, that reputation we built up, we got to get them back, okay? But then here's a big part of crisis communications is that we have to work hand in hand with operations. It's not just about what you say, it's also about what you do. And that's why I put this third point here, how we can restore or improve operations. Now, this point I pulled out from later in the presentation, but it's very important that we show that we care. Empathy goes a long ways. I think there's many instances of crises that could have just ended sooner if the organization just said, I'm sorry. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So this is the components of a crisis communications plan that I'm going to go through in the next few slides. I'm advocating that you all build one of these right now when there's nothing, there's not a major crisis going on, because at this point, you're in a time of calm and you can think rationally and you have all the time in the world. Think about how long it takes, some organizations to get a document approved, right? You have a press release or whatever and has to go through 6 supervisors and all the way back, and that's 2 weeks later. Well, you have all that time right now to get those statements written in advance. And think about the other situation. If you're in a crisis, things are coming at you at 100 miles per hour, right? You're building the plane as you fly it, so you don't have all this luxury. So that's why build the plan right now. That's the key. Build the plan right now so you can rely on it later. This part down here is something I want to point out to. I strongly encourage you all to, once you build the plan, to go through it like once a year, to spend 2 hours and just sort of do a rehearsal. Make sure it just makes sense. You might realize you have to revise it. Roles have to change. Like, oh, John can't do this role. It's going to actually have to be Jane, right? That type of thing. So you're basically testing it out. And then you're going to update the plan on a regular basis, maybe quarterly, because especially when you have personnel changes, right? Jane leaves. Now you have to replace Jane in the plan with Tim or whomever, right? So those are parts of your these are parts of your crisis communications plan that we're going to go through right now. First, I want you to sit down and think about all the different types of crises that could happen to your organization, okay? And it's not what hopeful that doesn't happen. It's just anything that could happen. You got to jot it down. In 10 years of doing crisis communications with Revelation, we have dealt with a shooting on property, accidental death on property, federal bribery charges, extortion, sexual harassment, religion in the workplace, and on and on and on I can go, okay? Once you list these crises, what I recommend is that you group them together. That way, you don't have to come out with all the write-ups for every scenario, because some of them are going to be similar. What I mean by that is like a tornado and an earthquake, for example. What you're going to say and what you're going to do is going to be somewhat related, so you can group them together. Here's another example. We currently just built a crisis communications plan for the Wisconsin Hotel and Lodging Association. So those crises are grouped by room issues, property issues, etc. Okay. So again, sit down and think what could possibly happen and then group them together. It doesn't have to be violent staff, sustained environment operations. These are just examples. You can group them in however way you want, but it's important that you go through this exercise. Then, once you have these crises, you're going to come up with a goal and strategies for each group of crises. So this is the same in the world of business, right? We should be goal oriented. And when we're doing crisis communications, we should also be goal oriented. So believe it or not, 2 years ago, we worked with the Dubuque Convention and Visitors Bureau, known as Travel Dubuque. And we built a crisis communications playbook for them, and it included a pandemic section. I kid you not. So what is one of the goals for the CVB? Well, obviously we want to limit tourism losses. There were other goals too. I'm just giving you an example, okay? And then we developed the strategies to accomplish that goal. So just to make sure we're on the same parlance, a strategy is a high-level, broad way of accomplishing something. So for example, if I needed to reach truck drivers, I might use a strategy of outdoor advertising. And the tactics to carry out the strategy would be billboards, gas station ads, etc., right? So these are our strategies to help limit tourism losses. Well, we got to make sure we stay in communication with all the meeting planners, all the conventions that were going to come to town, the fairs, the concerts, etc., right? Stay in regular communication with the health department. This seems obvious today, but back then when no one had ever gone through a pandemic, we actually had to think about all the different things you had to do and then provide ample information. And so we pre-wrote statements, we pre-wrote a press release, we pre-wrote social media posts, all that kind of stuff. Because once things shut down, right, you don't have a lot of time to start getting information out there. So that's why it really helps save you that time and effort to do it in advance. Okay, so goals and strategies for every one of these groups of crises. And then once you come up with the goals and strategies, we're going to determine your target audiences. And the number one audience in every situation should be internal audiences. So what I mean by that, let's say your hospital, your internal audiences are going to be your physicians, nurses, pharmacists. It's going to be your volunteers that come to the hospital, right? They need to hear it from you first. What are you going to do, and express that concern to them? If anything, this will also help kill the rumor mill. We've also dealt with layoffs too, right? And so that's actually a crisis where we had to do a wave of layoffs. And of course, as you can imagine, employees are worried about their own jobs. So we had to make sure we communicated to them. Over the last year now, we should all be familiar with all the tools to reach staff even remotely. So Slack, Google Meets, Trello, all those different tools, right? There's so many different ways to communicate to everyone. And then while you're communicating to internal audiences, this last point I feel is important, to remind everyone on your communications policies. For example, what happens if a reporter calls? Tell them to redirect that call to your official spokesperson, right? Whomever that might be. It might be the owner of the company, the president, general manager, but all the communication should come from that one person, not from the 20 people in your organization, right? Okay, so that's an important point too. And then after you reach out to your internal audiences, then it's time to talk to everyone else. So don't do it in reverse. Talk to your internal audiences first. Now, actions and responses. As I alluded to earlier, it's not just about what you say, it's also what you do. So then within each crisis grouping, we're going to come up with a list of actions you need to take. So for example, acknowledge the situation. I can't tell you how many organizations pretend nothing's wrong. Here's their argument that they've told me. Well, if we admit that there's something wrong, then some people who would never have found out are going to find out. I make the counter argument that if some people found out and you'd never said anything in the first place, you are going to be in much deeper trouble than had you just said something, right? That's my counter argument. So that's why it's important to acknowledge the situation. For those of you out there doing marketing, you likely are preloading your social media posts on Facebook, Twitter, etc. Take those down. Equifax, a few years ago, if you remember, they had a security breach. This was 2 days later. They tweeted "Happy Friday" when millions of people's social security numbers had just been stolen. Whoops. If you're doing traditional media buys or even digital media buys, make sure to pause those ad campaigns because you don't want conflicting messages out there. Transparency is hard. I know it, but you have to be as transparent as possible. It might even go along the lines of saying, hey, look, we are still investigating the situation. The moment we have something to report, we will. But as of right now, we are still investigating. It might just be that, okay? And then this last point, again, expressing concern. So I have battled lawyers on this. Typically, the lawyers say, hey, we don't want you as the organizations to say, I'm sorry, because that implies guilt. Here's my argument. I can say I'm sorry without meaning I'm guilty. For example, if your dog dies and I say, I'm sorry your dog died, it didn't mean I killed your dog, right? So say I'm sorry and put a period there. I'm sorry, period. Don't say I'm sorry you felt that way, right? Those are the insincere thing, apologies that don't go anywhere, okay? I'm sorry, period, okay? And then you're going to have a list of responses. Like I've said, you're going to have an initial statement. You might have things to put on your website, your email, newsletter. People might call you in anger and you might have a call script. People might contact you through your social media channels and you need to have responses, okay? So those are the things that you're going to write about. Over the past 6 months, we've dealt with a lot of COVID issues at my firm. Okay, so for example, there's an outbreak at your business. What are the actions you're going to take? Well, we're going to go over policies and procedures again. We're going to do a deep sanitization, right? Those types of things are the actions. Those go hand in hand, like I said, with operations. And then you're going to have the response. Look, we admit it. We had 5 of our staff members test positive for COVID-19, but they're now in self-quarantine. Everyone else is going to get tested. Okay, those types of things. And the rest of the team, what we're going to do is go through, all our safety protocols again. So what does that mean? Why are we going to go over safety protocols again? And why are we going over policies and procedures again? It's because of this point. You have to show to your audiences that you're going to prevent this situation from happening again. So I'm going to say that again. You have to tell people and show people what you're going to do to prevent this crisis from occurring again. Now, obviously, some things are out of your control, right? Like a tornado, but other things are within your control. For example, sexual harassment. That client of ours, we told them that they had to revise their employee handbook because they had to add more sections in that. And then on top of that, they had to have the management staff go through sexual harassment training. Okay. Those are the things they were doing to prevent a sexual harassment situation from happening again. So these are just examples of the policies and procedures that you might have to rewrite, amend, update. Okay. Look at all these different things that you might be looking at. We've dealt with a lot of cybersecurity too. That might be training employees how to avoid phishing emails, those types of things, okay? Here's some common mistakes we see. I'm just going to highlight one for sake of time, and that's victim confusion. Common mistake. Let's say I have a glass of water and I spill that glass of water all over you. If I said, oh, darn it, now I don't have any water and I'm going to be thirsty, boo. Am I the victim in this? No, it's you, because you are drenched. I spilled my water on you. You're the actual victim in the situation. So here's another example. A few years ago, the Susan G. Komen Foundation pulled all of its funding, or announced it was going to pull its funding from Planned Parenthood, and that had a public backlash. So the CEO at that time issued this statement: scurrilous accusations being, well, first of all, I didn't even know what scurrilous meant. I had to look that term up, okay? So scurrilous accusations being hurled at this organization are profoundly hurtful to so many of us. Is the Susan G. Komen Foundation the victim in the situation? Or is it the people who can't use Planned Parenthood because Planned Parenthoods out there don't have the funding to stay open, right? So that's another case of victim confusion. All right, here's the last section of this quick presentation. In a crisis communications webinar here, I had to bring in the airlines. So I'm sorry if you guys are fans of United, but I had to pull them in, okay? A few years ago, you may recall that they oversold the flight, and they did it to put in other crew members on. So they had to forcibly remove a passenger, or as United Airlines called it, reaccommodated, okay? So the CEO issued an apology. I put that in quotation marks. He said, "This is an upsetting event to all of us here at United." Is United Airlines the victim in this situation, or is it Dr. Dow, who, if you saw those videos, he's dragged off, he's bloodied, his glasses are askew, his shirt's way up, right? He's the victim in this, not United Airlines, okay? The part is that he used logic. So something my firm follows is this philosophy called heart over head, okay? In marketing and crisis communication and so forth, emotions trump logic, okay? You want to be logical about things, but these are emotional situations and they overtake logic. So in this case, he was saying, look, this was our policy. Our policies say when we are overbooked that we can take passengers off. So he was hiding behind policies, but that's the logical side. You saw this poor guy get dragged off and humiliated, right? And what passengers out there read airline policies? No one does, right? So he should have used empathy. UW Credit Union did a great job of this last week. Their cloud servers are down in Texas, and as you may have seen, Texas lost power and heat, so their cloud servers went down. So as a result, their members could not use the app anymore to access their accounts. So the CEO or president, whatever, issued a statement to say, we understand this is so frustrating and we are very sorry. At least you can still come into our branches and access your accounts, right? The servers going down were not his fault. It wasn't UW Credit Union's fault, but he still expressed empathy in that case, right? So here's some of the actions. One of the things that they violated was they sent different messages to different audiences. So to his internal, the staff at United Airlines, the CEO said, hey, you did the right thing. We got your back. Did the right thing. And then, a day later, like, we did the wrong thing. Whoops. Okay, those are conflicting messages, right? These last two parts I want to mention. Sometimes in your industry, if your competitors are in a crisis, you get pulled into that crisis too, right? Immediately, all the other airlines were contacted, like, what is your policy? So Southwest had to announce, well, we will no longer overbook flights. Delta said, look, we're going to now compensate people up to $10,000. And lastly here, as a result, like I said, you have to change your policies and procedures. So one of the things I believe United Airlines was looking at is that they're going to pull passengers now before they get on the airplane. So in the terminal, in the waiting area, if they overbook, that's when they will pull you at that point. Okay. So again, it's important that you change your policies and procedures to make sure that that situation doesn't happen again. Okay. I didn't take an entire breath during that 15 minutes. So thank you all for bearing with me at that incredibly fast speed. I'm happy to share this presentation too, so you can go over the slides and like, oh, that's what Brian said in 3 seconds. Okay. and don't hesitate to email me with any questions. There's no charge or anything like that.
Awesome. Good stuff. And I appreciate you so much for sharing this. I picked up a couple of good nuggets, and we do have a couple of folks that have questions if you have a few minutes to hang on with us.
Definitely.
Okay, awesome. So one that really resonated with me is, it's not what you say, it's what you do. How many times do we think we can put, either do a press release or run a bunch of commercials, right? But you've got to put it out there, but then it has to be so, or you look just as bad, right? Like, I walk into a store and they say we have great customer service, and you don't find that to be true. Every time their ad comes on that says we have great customer service, it ticks you off.
That is the goal of anyone that works in marketing, PR, advertising, is that we want to sit at the C-suite, right? We want to sit with the owner or president or CEO of the company and make sure that we are that bridge between the public and the company, right? And that it's a mutually beneficial relationship we're trying to generate. And it's not just saying, hey, this would be a great marketing initiative or an advertising campaign we should run. It's, hey, this is what's going on in the real world, and this is how we need to act, right? So just like Peggy queued up, you don't want that conflicting thing where you say you're green and you care about the environment, and then meanwhile you're polluting, right? It really is up to the marketing and PR department, because we cover the brand, the reputation of the company. And so it's up to us to look at operations and say, hey, stop polluting, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. You talked about reviewing, your practices and your policies once a year. I really think, that's something we've heard in many different categories. And quite frankly, I think public health did a real service to all of us early on when they kind of mandated that you needed to have a policy and procedure for how you were going to handle COVID-19. So this is, again, a reminder that if you don't have that, no matter how small your business is, it could really take you out if you don't do what Brian is suggesting with these pre-planned policies, statements. Again, you're going to have to float it when something happens, but no matter how big or small, you will be so grateful that you talked to Brian or somebody else and got these in place. So when the time comes, you have them. And I can't stress that enough, because do you find that a lot of businesses ignore that?
Yeah. And you know what? I know it may seem silly, or no one has the time in your office to rehearse, but it is really good to get that muscle memory. So I've actually attended a lot of conferences with an FBI agent that he actually goes through shooter training, active shooter training. So you can bring him into your organization. He'll run through a drill, but you have to block out an entire day, because he will get you through this scenario. It's not just looking at his tip sheet, right, that says do this, do that. You have to feel it out and know where to hide and exit and all that kind of stuff too. Same thing here is that, again, just walk through it once a year to just go through it, right? If you can do more, that's great, but minimum once a year.
And I think it helps with when you have staff. and whether that's, a spouse or one other staff person or whatever, it gives them a little bit of sense of security that there is a plan. You've thought that far in advance. So it's not just, being practical for you and your business, but it's really relaying that safety that's important to your business and important for your staff. I have a couple questions, and I have one that I want to bring up, and we don't have to go into details because I think everybody's well aware of it. But, there was a recent incident where an employee of a local media firm was arrested and charged. And this particular company deleted all of their social media accounts. This person was featured on a website. They took it down. I think that's right. But I feel, you brought it on early. I think what you do is we have this plan in place for these reasons. And you say, gosh, we're looking into this situation. We have no comment at this time, at the very minimum, right? Isn't that a better solution, do you think, than deleting?
Yes, completely agree. I know it's really hard, right? You want to delete these comments. I get it. The exception I would make to deleting comments is that you would have somewhere, for example, on your social media account, website, or wherever, that says, look, we will have an open discussion as long as the comment is not racist, profane, sexist, or otherwise insulting, right? You have that kind of language, which obviously people would understand that you would delete a comment full of expletives, right? So that's the one case where I say delete that if it's, out of bounds within this conversation, right? But, you're gonna have to take some of the punches, right up the front, but at least you're getting the messages out, right? Getting a statement out right away, like I said here, acknowledge the situation. It allows you to control the narrative, right? If you sit back and say nothing, people are coming up with their own assumptions, oftentimes wrong. And then that becomes the story in their mind, right? And then the rumor mill starts. That's why it's important to immediately acknowledge something. And even if you just say, hey, we're investigating, that's better than nothing.
Agreed. Yeah. And they took down their pages, and I just thought, boy, that really shuts off somebody who's, in this case, a listener who is so faithful, and in a category that needs it right now. And it's just basically like, we're not going to deal with it. I need to check into this, but I believe that there is a way. So if this would happen in someone else's business, I believe there's a way you can keep your page up, but keep others from posting comments at all. They can't you can post a statement, but you cannot, it won't allow for people to comment on your statement or post anything on your page without your approval. So I think that might be perhaps a better solution on that. The other thing I want to talk about, and again, I believe this to be true, help me if I'm wrong, but when we're on our social media, whether it's your business responding or your personal responding, and for this case, I know, in fact, it's a new thing on LinkedIn. Facebook has had it and they're amping it up. But when you see an article, a statement somebody else made, and you respond to that, whether now on LinkedIn, even if you like it, it shows up in everybody's feed that you're associated with. Point being is, I think before we comment, before we like, before we whatever, we should think about that as business owners.
I completely agree. Social media usage is a really tough one too, right? You're the face of your organization, right? And what you say and what you do reflects on your organization, whether you like it or not. And social media usage is definitely one of them. And also when you have employees, I've sat through enough presentations from employment relations lawyers that I am fearful of this, because right now the law sides with employees, not employers. Okay. So it's important to have a pretty tight social media policy within your organization. Even if you had just one staff member, it's still important.
Right. And, and I'll be honest, and I'm as guilty as the next person. We were in a heated political, I really had to restrain, and I'll be honest, I went back and deleted some of my comments. They weren't nasty. They were just my own personal opinion. And so I wanted to remove that. But I would just suggest that we keep an eye on that. Again, whether it's on behalf of your company or just on your own personal, we are in heated times right now. We're still coming off a political campaign. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and people feel ways about masks or not masks, and vaccine and not. And, I guess I would just encourage, and Brian, if you agree, but try and limit that. If it's important to you, great. But if it's not, that might be a good time to back off.
Yeah, and to follow up on what Denny was saying earlier in this presentation, he spent a lot of time this weekend watching basketball. I'm a huge Badgers fan, and sometimes on social media, I express my displeasure in how they're playing, right? Especially during losing streaks. So I have to make sure I go back and go through my posts and
Yes. I'm with you there. I will say this, over the last number of months, now that I'm conscious of it, I am like, okay, who really cares? Number one, but number two, it's not necessary. So
yep.
I don't see any other questions. If you do have a question, go ahead and let me know in the chat. Can you roll to this? There we go. Roll to your email slide in case somebody has any, needs or questions, or just wants to reach out to Brian. He is a wonder. This is his shtick. This is what he does. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. He's already got this formula. So I would encourage you to reach out and see if he might be of some service to you to help your business, at least get the ball rolling, get started, if not take you through the entire process. So not seeing other questions, and I hadn't talked to you about this, but we do something fun at the end of our interviews, Brian, and we call it 60 seconds with. So I'm going to throw some rapid fire questions at you, just so we can all get to know you a little bit better. Okay. If you don't mind responding, they're very easy. I promise you there's nothing in here. Favorite activity during the pandemic?
Oh man, I think my favorite activity, if I want to keep this public, is just hosting events. I'm not kidding. Obviously a lot of things have shut down. We lost a lot of fairs, festivals, concerts, etc. I never gave up. I still hosted socially distanced events, socially safe events. Like I did a wine tasting at my house. We were all spread out super far. And so that was my pleasure in doing all those things. I hosted an outdoor holiday party in December. So that was my favorite pastime of these past 10 months, is just doing things.
Love it. Love it. Rice Krispies or Cocoa Krispies?
Rice Krispies.
Boom. Cocktail that goes best with a Wisconsin fish fry?
Ooh, so I take my brandy old fashions press.
Ooh, my husband thinks he's got the lockdown on the secret recipe. He even wrote it down. It's so secret. Favorite Wisconsin sports team?
It's got to be the Badgers. Grew up in Madison and went to school here, so I bleed awesome. Badger red.
Nice. The last thing you read?
Oh, well, I'm actually studying for my MBA right now. And so it was some textbook on econ.
Nice. It must have left a good impression on you. Yeah. A must-have topping on your hamburger?
It's called Country Bob sauce. It's so obscure, but at a dive bar in Madison called the Wisco, that's where I discovered it. And I love putting it on my burgers. Country Bob sauce.
Got to check it out. Laptop or desktop?
It's really funny. I'm that weirdo that still likes a desktop. I'm using a desktop right now as we speak, but at my home office, but at my office, I'm using a laptop.
I love it. I'm with you there. The best trip you've ever taken?
Ooh, I've gone to so many fun places. I'll say this is that about more than a year ago, my family and I, we went to Las Vegas and we brought our kids, and they actually had a good time. We did everything but go to nightclubs and eat at fancy restaurants. And it's still a family-friendly place. I had never gone there with kids, and it worked.
There's some good hiking there. Did you guys hike?
Nope, we just stayed pretty much on the strip.
Nice. I love it. Teach them early. And your favorite musical group?
How about this? I'll answer locally. I love a lot of local bands, but locally I like the band Cherry Pie because I'm a huge 80s music fan and they do 80s covers.
Nice. Brian Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Awesome information. And again, if you have any questions or your business or organization, because I know we have a couple of chambers and some nonprofits on as well this morning, please reach out to Brian and I know he'll do a great job for you. Thanks again for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Colin, anything else?
That'll do it for today. Thank you, Brian. We appreciate the presentation. Thank you, Peggy, for sponsoring this event for us. Join us again next Monday and have a great week, everyone.